Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello and welcome back to the show. From the pages of classic literature to the plot lines of modern blockbusters, the concept of revenge has held a long-standing grip on our collective psyche, even going so far as to bleed into autobiographical songs that make use of vengeance as a muse. Think country murder ballad Goodbye Earl by The Chicks, or the much newer pop and R&B counterpart Kill Bill by SZA. But what lies beneath this primal urge? To answer this question, and explore the neuroscience of revenge, we're joined by psychiatry lecturer Dr. James Kimmel Jr., who is regarded as a breakthrough scholar and expert on revenge. In addition to serving as psychiatry lecturer at Yale School of Medicine, he is also the founder and co-director of the Yale Collaborative for Motive Control Studies. In his works, James largely focuses on neuroscience, psychology, revenge, addiction, forgiveness, and violence. Additionally, he's the author behind a new book, The Science of Revenge, that's coming out in May. And depending on when this episode is aired, it may have already been released. So welcome to the show, James. It's great to have you here.
Wow, thanks, Marie, very much for that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to learn more from you as well. It is a really fascinating topic. So tell us a bit about your background and what compelled you to pursue revenge research, as well as found the Yale Collaborative for Motive Control Studies.
Well, there are a lot of ways to go at that question, and it's been a lifelong journey for me, actually, that started in my teenage years and brought me up to this point in time. I had a pretty significant experience as a teenager of bullying that led me to have a lot and have to deal with a lot of the cravings for revenge, the desire for revenge to get back at the guys that had been beating up on me and worse. And that ultimately led to them coming to my house one night in the middle of the night and shooting and killing my dog. And then coming back about 2 weeks later and blowing up our mailbox. And at that point, I had had enough, and I wanted this stopped, and I wanted them stopped, and I wanted them to pay, for what they'd been doing to me for about 3 or 4 years total. And in the middle of the night, I grabbed a gun from my father's nightstand, and I took off after them in my mother's car through the dark of the night. And we lived in the country here in America, in central Pennsylvania. And I caught up to them finally. They didn't know it was me right away, but I caught up to them outside of a barn, and I cornered them, and they got out of their pickup truck and were looking back into, my bright beams of my car headlights. And I grabbed the gun and started moving toward the door. They didn't know I was armed, and they were not armed. And it would have been so easy to do what I wanted to do. But at the last second, I had this realization. I realized that if, I shot and killed them, I'd be killing the person that I knew I was. And I knew that I wasn't a murderer. I had been raised by good people. And that just little flash of insight was just enough to stop me, put the gun back down and drive away. They lived and I lived, but it was a very much too close call, too close for comfort for me. And I've spent the rest of my life trying to understand why I wanted to do what I wanted to do, why I didn't do it and why other people do it far too often. And that's what brought me here.
That is so impressive that you channeled all of that emotion from those few instances in your childhood to a lifelong dedication to understand this emotion. And, the idea of revenge has been touted as a gratifying experience across various forms of media throughout history. And it's great that now actually we do see a lot of instances where it is the idea of revenge, but the form of revenge comes in in doing better or rising above. So could you tell us a little bit more about why you think this this is such a muse that speaks to so many people?
Yeah, sure. It is because um, evolutionary research has now revealed, the dominant theory, and there's good evidence behind it, is that humans evolved to have a strong desire for revenge, um, beginning way back in the Ice Age, actually, and that the theory is that humans evolved this desire to retaliate against people who hurt us. In other words, to hurt the people who hurt us, punish them. We did that in order to be able to live in societies and to maintain social norms. And that's important, of course. And here we are today, 11,000 years later. It must have been beneficial, or we would have deselected out of it at some point in time. So revenge, just the general concept of this desire, gratifying desire, and we'll get into the neuroscience behind that in a little bit. But the desire and the pleasure that we get from punishing those who harm us, that's evolutionarily derived. And it's baked in and built into the system, and we're hardwired for that. The question, becomes now, though, in 2025, in a modern world, we're not cave dwellers anymore. We have lots of powerful weapons. We have nuclear bombs. We have billions and billions of people on the planet versus a very small number at the beginning. Is it still, an adaptive, positive motivation for us, any longer? And there might be instances where we could say that it is, but when it becomes violent, violence is by definition maladaptive, it's pathological. And on top of that, that type of pathology, what the neuroscience is now showing is that it is leading us towards uncontrolled addictive forms of revenge seeking. And that is now being demonstrated, inside of functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners. And we're able to see this now activating the exact same neurocircuitry as addiction. And that discovery is very recent, and I've been part of that, discovering that revenge is an addictive process for some people. And what I mean by that is an addiction is a behavior that you're unable to resist despite the negative consequences. And revenge has negative consequences written all over it. When you get to the point where you can't resist it, like I was that night on the farm, but I was able at the last second to stop it, thank God, but so many people are not, then it can become an addictive process.
Right. That's very illustrative and serves as a great preface for our topic for today. But before we go further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met James? And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
Oh, well, my favorite book is probably, John Steinbeck's East of Eden, which just happens to be about revenge seeking and how to control it and what happens when it's not controlled. So yeah, that's been my lifelong favorite book.
Yeah. And what movies have you been enjoying recently?
Wow. I'm not a big. I don't go to the Cineplex, and I don't binge or stream them on TV. So I have a feeling I'm gonna draw a blank on what movies I've been watching recently. I think the most recent one I watched was Florence Foster Jenkins. I think is what it was.
Oh,
Which
what
is
was it about?
that's a Hugh Grant and Meryl Streep movie from maybe 2016, and it is about a woman in New York who is a hyper wealthy philanthropist who always wanted to sing opera, but she is terrible at singing. And her husband, who's sort of a half gigolo, has a relationship on the side, does everything he can to conceal from her that she's really bad. But she eventually takes the stage at Carnegie Hall and makes quite a fool of herself. But it doesn't end so badly. That's what that movie's about.
It sounds like a funny premise, but like, what's the tone of the movie? Is that what they were going for, or is it actually like quite pitiful?
It's both. It has humor and pity. So it's a good movie in that way. It covers, I think, honestly, all of the emotions that are involved in a situation like that. She has enough money, and he has enough money to conceal everything from her, but she ends up getting beyond his control, and it goes badly. But there's a lot of laughter as well as tears. She also happens to have like a life-threatening illness that's taking her down at the same time.
Oh dear, I would not wish to be in that situation. But it sounds like a great movie. I love movies with that duality and the multifaceted nature. But with regards to podcasts, are there any that you're listening to at the moment?
Right now with my book release, I've been scheduling a lot of podcasts, but I haven't had a chance to listen to a lot. And so I haven't been a heavy consumer of podcasts at all. So I really don't have, like a top fave that I listen to.
Yeah.
Mainly because my work just consumes most of my time.
Yeah, that's so fair. And I feel like actively listening to podcasts is also pretty time consuming. People always say like you can just chuck on a podcast and do whatever you want. But I genuinely feel like I can't. Like if I'm to absorb all the information from the podcast, I need to be sitting there doing something else that's like not taking up my brain. Yeah. You're nodding, so I'm
right.
I'm going to take that as agreement.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I mean, it's real. I would love to listen to a lot of podcasts because it's the incredible amount of talent, subjects, guests, great hosts like yourself. But there just doesn't. I haven't gotten to a point where I feel like I have enough time to do that at all.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to some days of quiet when I'll be able to join the rest of the world in podcast media.
You and me both, James. As a podcast host, I don't have that much time to listen to podcasts myself. But either in your professional life or your personal life, is there anyone that you've looked up to?
Oh, so many, but Mahatma Gandhi is a super luminary leader for me. As a person, in the life he lived and his, peace and anti-revenge teachings are inspirational for me. And people like Martin Luther King, Jesus of Nazareth, all of those types of people, although they weren't focused on revenge per se. They were focused, of course, on violence as among their most essential teachings. And in that sense, they were very focused on revenge because research is now very clear that the primary motivation for almost every form of human violence, all of them from, youth violence and bullying up through intimate partner violence and street and gang violence, mass shootings, genocide, terror, torture, and war, all of that, the whole array, all of that, the primary motivation is a desire for revenge, which is to say, grievance triggered revenge seeking. Revenge seeking always starts with a real or imagined perception that you've been wronged. And this instantly activates inside the brain this desire to retaliate. And that's that's the inherited evolutionary part of that.
Yeah, interesting few picks right there. And my last question for you before we end of this segment is, has there been a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this day?
Ooh, a course or a class? I'm not going to out myself on how long ago it was when I took my last course or class. But I would say, with what I do and what I've been doing for 20 years plus on the heavy research side of this, the courses or classes for me, it has been a very personal, a deep and personal life class. And the course that I've essentially erected around myself and the research program that I've created and followed, and the other researchers, the neuroscientists from around the world who have fed all of the evidence into this, into revenge seeking as an addictive process, that's the course that is most potent for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I feel like we got to know you a little bit better. So now let's jump right into the interview. And for starters, how would you define happiness?
Wow, happiness. So for me, at least, and this isn't, I'm not an expert on happiness, and there's an entire branch now of psychology, for the psychology of happiness. But for me, at least, it's in large part the absence of grievance and a desire for revenge. It sort of can be defined as I think about it, and I haven't really thought about that question that way. But I think that an interesting way of answering it is with its negative in this case. And I usually don't like to do that. I don't like to define things by their opposite. But in the case of happiness, it's interesting to think about a state of mind in which you are free of grievance, you are free of any desire to harm somebody else or yourself. That state right there, for a lot of people, is difficult to find. And when you have it, I think you found a large part of what happiness means. It's the absence of pain. And grievance trigger revenge seeking is the result of pain. Pain is the first step. So if we, eradicate the pain, we are opening ourselves up to happiness in all forms. So I don't know if that directly answered your question, but that's how I'm thinking about it right now.
Yeah, it certainly does. And on the other hand, how would you define anger, and especially in relation to revenge?
Yeah, sure. That is, clearly I have a very, it's unique. The findings that I describe in my book, The Science of Revenge, and that I talk about, the research that I've done is still on the very fresh and new side. But anger, as I see it, is a real or imagined perception of having been wronged or mistreated, treated unjustly, humiliated, betrayed, any of those things. that creates it creates pain inside the brain, and we can see that pain. It activates the neural circuitry of the brain's pain network. There's where anger is. It's pain. It's this sense of deep psychological pain. And then the question becomes, what does that pain drive us to do, and what do we do with it, and how good are we at resisting what we're driven to do?
Yeah. And with respect to today's topic of conversation, what is your definition of revenge?
Yeah, revenge is, punishing someone who has wronged you. That's probably the simplest definition. Punishing or hurting the person who hurts you is the definition of revenge. And I think that's been the definition throughout, at least recorded human history when we think about what revenge really means. And I just want to add to that, we often focus, and a lot of my research has focused on violent revenge. And violent revenge is a form, but not the only form of revenge. There are many, many more forms of retaliation or revenge that are nonviolent, unkind words, insults, slights, plotting, to take away someone's boyfriend or girlfriend. There are, making life a little more difficult for somebody, socially excluding them from friend networks or social networks and things like that, mean tweets, all that stuff. So there are lots of forms of revenge that are not violent, and they're of course, the most common and most prevalent forms of revenge. But we focus on the violent forms because they're by far the most destructive and dangerous forms of revenge, and that's where the focus needs to be if one of your goals is to reduce the level of violence, physical harm, in the world around you.
Yeah. And how would you describe the relationship between happiness, anger, and revenge? How do they all come together?
Yeah, I think maybe I've spoken to that already just a little bit, but the process, right, is the way I like to think about it. This might give you a good image of it. I think we all wake up every morning, and at that, in that twilight between sleep and awake, it's as if we wake up and we have our full treasure of happiness for the day. It's right there for us, right? There's the pressures of the world, the demands, the slights and insults and things that people might be slinging at us. That hasn't started yet. So we're happy. We're kind of in a bliss state. And it's as though that's our treasure for the day. And maybe you could sort of think of that as that's what's in your purse or in your wallet, right? And then you become fully awake and you start. And then the first thing happens. And the first thing that happens, might be, an insult, or you read something on the news that's upsetting, or, you stub your toe, or, you spill coffee on yourself, or any number of things. But these things trigger pain. And the pain, when that comes, particularly if it's inflicted by another human being, it feels as though they're a thief, and they've come and they've stolen that precious treasure of happiness that you had just moments ago, and now they've run off with it. And in an economic model of exchange, it would make sense for us to run after and go after that person who just stole our happiness and try and take it back. But what we find when we get to that person who just said the unkind word, the insult, or the slight, is that they don't have our happiness after all. All they did was, hit us with an insult. So what we do, though, is we do the very next best thing. We go, well, okay, it's not like it's gold or silver or something I can just take out of their wallet and stick in mine, and which is very frustrating. But we think logically, well, what if I inflict unhappiness on that person? If I make them suffer, that will make me feel better. And it does for just a brief moment inside the brain. It gives you a high. And that's how it becomes this addictive process. So you retaliate back with your unkind word, and you feel better for an instant, and then you start feeling worse again. And now you're caught in this spiral. And the spiral is they're going to retaliate back against you, and you're going to retaliate back against them. And now everybody's treasure and supply of happiness is completely lost. And we're all getting, the only supply we're getting is from each one of these little hits of revenge. And what we see inside of a brain scanner when that's happening is that your brain on revenge looks like your brain on drugs.
That's really fascinating. So, from the scientific perspective, what are the psychological factors that compel someone to seek revenge?
Yeah, so if we take that scenario that I just gave you of waking up in the morning, and let's just assume that in that scenario, maybe it's you and, a partner, a family member, child, parent, it doesn't matter, but somebody says something that hurts your feelings, right? And it's as if they've stolen your happiness. So that initial hurts your feelings concept, and this is a light thing. I mean, it could be much worse. It could be an act of violence. You could have woken up to, getting struck in the face or worse. But in this scenario, it's just an unkind word. But in either one, whether it's pretty violent, I mean, the violent has a physical injury to it, but it always also has a psychological injury. And the unkind word always has a psychological injury. So what that's doing inside the brain is it's activating this area of the brain called the anterior insula. And that's part of the brain's pain network. So what we get from what we call a grievance, which is defined as a real or imagined perception of unfair treatment or injustice or insult or shame, humiliation, any of those things. Those things that we have many words for are registered in the brain in the pain network as pain. It's psychological pain, and it can be searing and it can be lasting. And other times it might be something we brush off. Sometimes this pain can be imagined. Somebody says something that you took offense to, they didn't mean offense at all. But it doesn't matter, because if the grievance, the thing that they said is registering as pain for you, hey, then it's pain. It's pain for you. And there's no, universal judge out there that can come down and say, oh, we just quickly surveyed 1 billion people around the world and none of them would have thought that was painful. So it's not painful. It doesn't work that way. There's no judge, and it is painful to you. And if it's painful to you, here's what happens next. So that grievance, real or imagined, then activates. Let me put it through. So the next thing is the brain is in pain, and the brain wants to feel better again, right? The brain wants balance. The brain never wants pain. It wants pleasure or equilibrium. So what it wants to do is create a pleasurable experience to counteract the pain. And to do this, the brain begins activating the pleasure and reward circuitry of addiction, which are two areas of the brain. One is called the nucleus accumbens, and one is the dorsal striatum. These are the reward and pleasure centers of the brain, and they're dopamine rich. So there's, dopamine is released, and then it sinks right away. And this releasing of dopamine and then sinking of dopamine, or the disappearance of dopamine, that creates this craving experience. That's the craving experience that, drug addicts experience. But it's also the experience that those of us in pain who are beginning to think about revenge are experiencing, which is this strong desire to get revenge, which is to say to inflict pain or suffering on the person who hurt us, or, and this is a weird thing, but it's very true and very common, or their proxies. So even if we can't get back at the person who harmed us for some reason, we might seek revenge against somebody who had nothing at all to do with the pain that was inflicted on us. So the common example there is, You have a bad day at the office, your boss is mean to you. You can't say anything back because you might lose your job. So you come home, and the classic scenario is you kick the dog. That kicking of the dog is this vicarious revenge moment in which you're getting revenge against this poor dog who's done nothing to you except for showing you love. But it doesn't matter because you need to get rid of this pain from this bad experience early in the day.
Yeah.
The last part of that in the neurological cycle is there's another part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, and that's supposed to stop us from doing things to harm ourselves. It's supposed to weigh costs and benefits. It's the executive control function, the decision-making area. If that area has been hijacked or overwhelmed, it won't stop you from seeking dangerous forms of revenge at the very moment when you need that stop. And if you blow through it, and that's classical addiction situation, you do the things to yourself and other people that you know will harm yourself, but you just can't help it. That is what I call revenge addiction.
Right. And on the other hand, though, thinking about seeking revenge is also pretty common. So what occurs in the brain when we are mulling over these vengeful thoughts?
Yeah, so when we're just imagining revenge seeking, right, and we're not acting on it, we're getting all of that to happen. And it may be, for instance, that prefrontal cortex is stopping you from acting out your revenge fantasy. And we have revenge, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, famously said once that, every day and every hour of every day, we are constantly doing away with the people who insult or harm us inside our minds. So this is an ever-present experience for humanity and humans around the world. We don't always act in the real world on these revenge fantasies, but we have these revenge fantasies. And Freud would say we have them even inside our subconscious, let alone our conscious mind. But when we have those, we get gratification from imagining what we might have done, what we could do to the person who harmed us, or what we really wish we should do. But for any number of reasons, we decide not to, or we decide to postpone it until another time and reconsider it, or maybe do it at a time when it's safer, or maybe change the plan. But we're sort of always plotting this revenge experience and fantasizing about it. And if that becomes a ruminating process where we just kind of can't let it go, it's disrupting our life, it's disrupting our sleep, it can become very toxic internally. And it can eventually lead to that point where it moves from just a fantasy to a real life act. So those, revenge fantasies can be useful in releasing, but if they go too far, they can become extremely dangerous.
And with the very integral role of the prefrontal cortex in stopping us from seeking revenge or acting on revenge, is there a correlation between age or disability and the tendency to seek revenge? Just because there's some disabilities where, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed until much later in life, or, with ADHD, for example, you may have trouble with executive function. Could you share some insights about that?
A little bit. So one thing I can say, the research is pretty clear and solid now that this desire to retaliate when we've been harmed begins in the toddler years. So toddlers experience this, and if you think about a toddler, if you take something that they want out of their hands, or if you discipline a toddler, you're going to get often a pretty, quick negative reaction from the toddler. They might hit, they might say something mean, they might become stubborn and stomp away. They could do a lot of things. So, researchers have found revenge desires as early as the toddler years. Now, at the other end of this age spectrum, even in the senior years, it's revenge is also prevalent all the way through the human lifespan. So it goes from one end to the other. With regard to deficits that I think you're mentioning that might exist in the prefrontal cortex or lack of development, and I think research is pretty clear that until the mid and late 20s, that area of the brain isn't fully developed. So teenagers struggle a lot with revenge desires, and they're off, and teenagers are given, at least here in the United States, very little to no support for even being aware of the power of revenge desires and then how to manage those. And of course we see, just as we do with all other forms of addiction, that the prevalence of addiction is highest in those teen through early 20s, and then sometimes for some people lasting into the 30s range, and then eventually it starts to for the general amount of the population to start to decline again. So the answer, I think, is I don't know if it was a yes or no question, because I kind of forget exactly how you phrased that, but the point is that deficits or lack of development of the prefrontal cortex places people at significant disadvantage in terms of being able to manage their revenge cravings. And so we see higher levels of violence, higher levels of retaliatory violence in those age populations. As for ADHD, I don't think I've seen any research on that, and I'm not sure, and I wouldn't want to speak to whether or not that ADHD is something that results in or from a prefrontal cortex deficit. I don't have that information.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And I would love to see more work and research in the future about how disabilities or, age might play a role in how one might seek revenge, especially with like ADHD as impulse control. And that's just an example out of the slew of disabilities out there. But for now, I would love to talk about your work as well that has led to the development of the behavioral addiction model of grievance, revenge, and violence. Could you tell us about how this model might inform new approaches of violence prevention and control?
Yeah, happy to do that. So these insights that we've been discussing about thinking about revenge as an addictive process and knowing that revenge is the root cause of almost all forms of violence. This is really, I believe, extremely good news for humanity, because we now have, for the first time, a way of thinking about preventing and treating violence using public health and medical approaches, and not only needing to rely on more revenge seeking, which is what we do when we put people in prison. We put them in prison to protect society from dangerous people, of course, but a lot of imprisonment and other forms of the criminal justice system's penalties for criminal acts are punitive and they're revengeful. It's society's way of getting revenge against people for breaking laws and social norms. And so wouldn't it be great, though, if our mental health professions and all of our medical professions could actually have some tools that they could use to prevent and treat violence? And the way of doing that is by thinking about revenge as an addictive process, because we already have like decades and tens and maybe hundreds of billions of dollars invested in addiction research. And a lot of the tools that we've created and strategies and treatment programs and prevention programs that work for things like drug and alcohol, substance use disorders, gambling disorders, all of these things. A lot of that because it's the same brain biological process, a lot of those strategies can be used for revenge seeking and violence. So we have entire professions that are really well-skilled, well-armed, and the pharmaceutical industry is coming along very quickly with things like GLP-1 drugs that seem to reduce cravings beyond just the craving for food, but the cravings for anything. And eventually, if we use these addiction-informed prevention and treatment programs for revenge and violence, we may find, and I believe we will find very quickly, that we're able to prevent and treat violence as using these tools and activating our health systems to do it.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So what I'm taking away from this is that essentially the average person, if they are struggling with, let's say, ruminating in vengeful thoughts or struggling with potentially, I don't know, impulse control, they can search online, interventions for addiction, and just follow through with whatever's available there, and it will sort of help guide that redirecting.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the questions then become can we get this information out to the general population of people who are struggling with this, and then also to the mental health and addiction providers to begin to think along these lines. And that's the purpose of my book, The Science of Revenge, is to bring this out to the public to motivate everybody, and including, start teaching kids and especially youth and teens about the dangers of revenge seeking and how it can become an addictive, compulsive process, and begin doing that, throughout the lifespan and in every domain, from the policymaking, education, parenting, mental health, addiction support. All of these areas can be turned toward violence prevention and treatment, with the outcome being is that we're living in a more peaceful inside of ourselves. Our families are more peaceful, our communities, our societies, our nations, and even in between nations. So that's really the process there, I think. And I think that's what this information is creating a new dawn for.
Yeah, that's pretty revolutionary. I mean, my experience with vengeful thoughts is that I will have some non-violent coping mechanism, like, for example, emotional eating. It's very much my way of getting revenge, but actually not on the person that I received like so-called pain from. It's just my way of dealing with it, but it's not harmless. It's harmful through me. So I would love to know a little bit more about, what kind of practices would be great for anyone experiencing this, especially because I think a lot of us have adapted to such coping mechanisms where we end up inadvertently self-harming. We don't intend to, but we, for example, overeat, or we overconsume alcohol, for instance. So yeah, I think this leads us perfectly into our practices and habits segments. So what is a habit that you'd recommend practicing to redirect that, or curb the revenge cravings and thoughts?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I'm excited to be here because, fully half or more than half of my research has been in the area of what do we do with this information side of it. And I've created in my research, and my group has tested a process in which we well, let me back up. I want to talk just a minute about what's happening inside the brain when we forgive, because forgiving is kind of like it's kind of the available silver bullet that is the most powerful and the most freely available everywhere way of managing these compulsive revenge cravings. And the way that what's happened is the neuroscience of revenge has also given birth to the neuroscience of forgiveness. So let me tell you what happens inside the brain when you forgive. So when you forgive, I described the pain, the psychological pain, which is resident in this anterior insula. So when you forgive, or even just imagine forgiving someone, what happens inside your brain is that pain network, the anterior insula, gets quiet. It calms down. The pain is immediately reduced. It's not gone yet, but it is reducing rapidly. At the same time, forgiveness is also quieting the craving centers of the brain, the nucleus accumbens and the dorsal striatum. So those pleasure and reward circuitry also starts to wind down and become dull. And then at the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the executive function stop circuitry that's supposed to stop you from doing things to harm yourself or others, that spools up. So forgiveness is giving you like all these reverse benefits, and we can see this inside of the neuroscience research, to counteract these powerful and sometimes compulsive and highly dangerous revenge cravings. So why don't we, so we're hardwired, we are as hardwired to forgive as we are as hardwired to seek revenge. Why don't we forgive more often? That's kind of like the multi-zillion-dollar question. And part of that, I think, is highly cultural. Forgiveness has gotten, over human history, when we didn't understand that it could do something literally inside our brain to change pain and pleasure, it got bound up as part of religion and spirituality. And that it's a good thing, because religion and spirituality maintained our awareness that forgiveness is a thing, even though it wasn't equipped to explain how it could work in such a powerful healing way. But it's actually physically healing. And that's the thing we don't know. And in part because it's caught up in religion, and it's also caught up then in, kind of the, I guess, we'd have to say that, the patriarchal societies in which forgiveness is, it's frowned upon. It's a sign, it must be weakness because you're not pummeling somebody, right? So there's this cultural expectation that, you'll be hurt or ruined if you don't retaliate, which is not true. You'll be hurt or ruined almost always when you retaliate, but we've kind of told ourselves the opposite story. So what I've been doing is I've worked with, since my original training is as a lawyer, and I was a litigator, and I considered myself a revenge addict, recovering revenge addict from, that teenage experience. But after the teenage experience with the gun, I decided to become a lawyer so that I could get revenge legally, right? So I became, in our society, at least in the Western cultures, lawyers are the only people that are licensed to, manufacture, prescribe, and distribute revenge, just like doctors prescribe opioids, so that's our drug. That's the drug that we sell. And I became a lawyer to do that work. And I sold it as fast as I could. And I started making a lot of money doing it. And it started ruining my life. But unlike, probably most every other lawyer that's lived, I started to freak out about this and go, I feel like I'm in an addictive process. And it turned out after 20 years of research that I was. So, but what's important about that experience of law is that there's this archetypal way that humans have evolved to deal with all sorts of conflicts and disputes, and that's the trial process, right? What we want when we're harmed, trauma scientists will tell you, is we want to get rid of psychological pain or manage it. One of the things we want is to be heard, and we want accountability. And we get that through a trial process. So what I did is I adapted the trial process, which is, this confrontational experience where you put the person who hurt you on trial, but you play yourself, you play them, you play the judge, you play the jury. It's a role play. And then you play ultimately the warden punishing them and then the judge of your own life. And this enables you to kind of get the revenge you want safely inside this imaginary courtroom inside your mind. And then at the end, in the last step, you're invited to just imagine. All you need to do is imagine, and this is my recommendation for anybody listening to this podcast. If you've been wronged and you can't get over it, and you're ruminating on it and it's ruining your life, you can jump to just this last one simple step, which is just imagine forgiving the person who wronged you. Don't tell them you're forgiving them, because you never have to do that. Forgiveness benefits you. All these benefits are inside your brain. You need the healing. If you want to heal and you want to get past it and you want to live a life of peace and happiness, just imagine for 5 seconds what it might feel like to forgive the person who hurt you. And what you will experience, I've done this with hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of people now, is that we always say the same thing. Wow, I guess if I have to imagine, and this is even somebody who was the victim of a gang rape. So she was putting on trial the people who raped her. And she said, I guess I would feel this great burden lifted off of me because I don't have to get revenge against them anymore. It's done. I can move beyond it. And then from that point, you just have to imagine it again and again and again. And eventually you will come to the point where it feels so good to forgive, and it's so healing, and it's so powerful, compared with seeking revenge and living with this intense desire to destroy other people and what that's doing to your life and to potentially to theirs and your family, that you naturally want to choose the thing that brings you the most joy and pleasure, and that would be to forgive.
Yeah, it is also a little bit more convenient because you don't have to go out there and destroy lives. So it's a win-win. Can I also just say that I find it really admirable that your idea of revenge was to go and study law, because that's not to like put any type of revenge on a pedestal at all. But yeah, it is quite...
Well, I guess when I say that, Marie, what I'm sort of saying is that I was fully revenge addicted at that point. I wasn't willing to destroy myself to take the lives of those 4 guys, right? But I was really revenge obsessed.
Yeah.
And law was the legal way I could get it. And until I went through that process and almost destroyed my own life doing it, it took until that point when I finally began to suspect this is an addictive process. And it was at that point in 2005 until now that I began this quest to understand what's happening inside the brain when we are hurt and we want to retaliate.
Yeah, and all the more impressive that you rose above it, and for the rest of your life was correcting that, for not just yourself, but for everyone else. So yeah, that I find that really admirable, and I think it's the perfect time to lead into our open mic segment, where you will get the opportunity to talk about anything you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
I feel like I've taken it away for most of this time, and I'm sorry for my my getting carried away about this. I am so passionate about it, as you can tell, I'm sure, from listening to me talk. And you only need to ask one question, and I could probably fill up 2 to 5 hours of time in no time, because these are fundamental human behaviors that the earliest stories in the Bible, right? Cain and Abel is a revenge killing. The first killing in the Jewish and the Christian Bibles, in the Torah and in the Old Testament, was Cain killing his brother for revenge. And almost the very next story is God in the story flooding and committing the greatest mass murder of all time, right, in terms of storytelling, by flooding the earth and just trying to destroy all of humanity to retaliate for, humankind's disobedience. These were not stories recommending that we do those things. Although I feel and I fear, unfortunately, that many sects, with not all religions, but sects within religions, have decided that this is the way we should be, right? We should do what they did or what God did. And that's exactly not what these stories are about. These are warnings to humanity. Do not, and in both cases, those were compulsive, revenge-addicted tirades where the actors, Cain and God, were unable to restrain their compulsion to retaliate and destroy. And so these are so archetypal that to touch on this, and of course, throughout history from the Odyssey through the Greek tragedies and Shakespeare and Alexandre Dumas and Kill Bill and John Wick and even The Lion King, which is a intense revenge plot. We're still grappling with and trying to understand and get our arms around this intense desire for revenge. And we're still dealing with the pain and the wounds of not having figured it out yet. World wars have been fought for revenge. My research in the book, I go over in detail Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. And all three of those guys were from their early years, just revenge-addicted people. They led their wars and committed their murders and their atrocities just for the sake of getting revenge. But the good news is that comes out of World War II is that something miraculous happened that I don't think we give enough time to thinking about. And that's that at the end of World War II, the victors in that case, the United States and, Western Europe, did something remarkable and decided to forgive Germany and rebuild that country. And as a result of that one astonishing act of global forgiveness, largely we've enjoyed 80 years of peace with Germany as a result. It's an amazing international level scope act of forgiveness that has produced incredible benefits. And it wasn't that hard for us to do that, but we tend to forget it. And we dramatize more the bombs and the guns. And we don't think about that last moment of heroism by the leaders at the time, President Truman and others, who decided instead of wiping Germany off the map, we would forgive them and rebuild them. And that's why we have enjoyed the peace that we have. But it's a fragile peace, and we've got to remember to do this time after time after time.
Yes, and that's how we enjoy schnitzel now.
Right.
Well, thank you. That was an exceptional use of the open mic, and it really does shed very illustrative detail as to revenge, cautionary tales of revenge through the years of the world. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, James, once again for joining us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that opportunity. So please visit my website. It's jameskimmeljr.com. That's my website. Or please check out my book, which is coming out, as we talked at the beginning of this podcast. It's coming out at the end of May, and it's called The Science of Revenge, Understanding the World's Deadliest Addiction and How to Overcome It, from Penguin Random House. And that'll be available. I'm not sure how it's going to spin out with Australia, or New Zealand, or are you? And where are you? You're in Australia, right?
We're in Australia. Yes.
Australia, right. I wasn't sure. All of a sudden I went, is that New Zealand or is Australia? So I'm not sure when it'll be available there. It might be available on that date. But at any rate, you can see my website and go from there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, perfect. We'll link those in the show notes. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.